We are going to start our conversation about this mysterious interview that has been really kind of bewildering to me, how much attention it's getting, and sort of some of the accusations I'm hearing now, not just about me, personally and how I'm reacting to it, but how it's being portrayed as an example of why we shouldn't trust experts and what's wrong with experts. So I invited my friend Eric Weinstein, who is an eminent scientist, mathematician, and friend. We had dinner the other night and kind of were discussing this. So I wanted to bring him in as well, and he's graciously joined us. So we're going to talk. Hopefully, I'm going to get to a better microphone in just a bit. But I know that Eric's had some thoughts about this as well. For me, I'll just be honest, I'm very worried when people go on huge platforms, the biggest English language speaking podcast or English language platform in the whole world. And Joe's had on scoundrels like me, but he's had on a lot of people lately who are not only counter-narrative, unorthodox, heterodox thinkers, but are actually calling into a question the following phenomena: the moon landing, the various hypotheses about the Earth not being flat, or not being flat, being round. Hopefully that wasn't clipped from my 10-year review, and that the Earth may not be round, that the Earth is in fact flat, the moon landings were a hoax. Now we're hearing questions about the properties of the natural numbers and equations, including strange behaviors that Eric will summarize as well. So to have this happen, as well as things that aren't conspiracies, having Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on talking about the COVID vaccine and other issues that he spoke about. But he's had on people from Tucker Carlson to Bart Sibrel to recently Terrance Howard. And the question I have is if this is a good thing for science and for society. I wanted to have Eric maybe share your experiences. What have you experienced as fallout as someone whose extremely large platform makes him a good person to talk to get his appearance, his perspective on this whole matter. So Eric, if you're able to, could you unmute and help us walk through this perplexing situation of the distrust in experts in science?
I guess I find myself in a relatively difficult position because it's very clear to me that the experts have failed and that the vacuum left by the collapse of institutional trust is now going to be filled by things that are not an improvement necessarily on the expert perspective, that the expert perspective is really a victim of, I would say, the political economy. When you don't pay experts, you don't give them high prestige, you don't give them the ability to chart a course through a life the way, let's say, professors were once able to do with academic freedom, very high standards, grant security. They were much more trustworthy. Right now, what we have is we have a culture of expert witnesses. And the culture of expert witnesses is eroding trust in experts. And I think that the experts would do very well to take that very seriously, not to reflexively say, ha, 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 people believe now in a number system where 1 times 1 equals 2. Instead, what they should be doing is say, what is it that we've done that has lost so much credibility so quickly? And I would say it has a lot to do with COVID origins. It has a lot to do with not acknowledging national security issues and pretending that they aren't national security issues. This goes under the heading of covert operations, which are deniable operations. That's not a conspiracy theory. In fact, it is what, let's say, the CIA is tasked with, not just intelligence, but also doing things that can be denied. And so by denying way too many national security things, by denying scientific things, by not paying people, by allowing for all the gamesmanship in academics. A small number of topics, particularly COVID origins, the COVID vaccine, lying about inflation, lying about the Fed, the money supply, M1, M2, being deceptive about Ukraine and Russia and the risks that are being run, et cetera, not covering the Jeffrey Epstein story, not covering the firebombing of the federal courthouse, where you could see a daily battle, but then it didn't appear to be a big deal to our major news organs. This is the thing that's destroying expert credibility. Now,
Yes.
the problem is that on the other side, we're really going to talk about 1 times 1 equals 2 and 0 doesn't exist. And I mean, come on.
Well, one thing you left out, Eric, is the greatest concentration of experts, which is the university system. Bearing professor, member of the academic institution, and you being an academician, a scholar, and an intellectual, all your life spent around academics and in academic settings. I find that to be one of the nexuses that you might have omitted, maybe not intentionally, but we're seeing a concomitant destruction of the respect for universities, which used to be the paragon of civilization, being completely eroded at my campus, at your alma mater, Harvard, and many other institutions. How do you think the universities play into this, and what culpability do they have when you hear, the kind of chants that are going on campus, and then you also see the intellectual pushback to such individuals as myself?
Well, roughly speaking, the universities have been on a slide since the late 60s. The legal changes that have been inflicted on universities include the Mansfield Amendment, which cut off military funding for blue sky research, the Eilberg Amendment in 1976, which changed the immigration status, the Bayh-Dole Amendment in 1980, which gave universities the right to commercialize their findings, which made it the case that blue sky wasn't a mandate because it was supposed to be the thing that the market couldn't do. And then we doubled up. Then we did the Immigration Act of 1990, the NSF and the National Academy of Sciences through the PRA and GUIRR divisions lied about a labor shortage where they knew full well that they were trying to suppress wages, but they were claiming a demographic shortfall so that no one would be around to do science and engineering. The number of changes in the environment, in law and in funding, cancellation of the SSC, superconducting super collider, changes in the structure of the NIH under Reagan. Basically, what we've done is that we've taken something that was secular sacred. Like, we have reverence for universities, even though we don't tie it to God, because we revere knowledge. There's sort of a respect that you have for books, even if the book is Thin Thighs in 30 Days. If it has a spine and papers between it, it might be a bad book. But people who revere books, revere learning, have been taking it on the chin, because effectively what we've done is we've turned this sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, a monastery or a nunnery into a house of ill repute, and it's too close to business. It's it doesn't have the right relationship to the military. I wish we had in the U.S. a more open relationship to the military, where we had some say in the ethics of the toys that we create. But what I find is that it's been a long slide since around 1970, and these universities are going to have to, there's a very important part of the New Testament where Jesus visits the temple and sees the money changers and is not happy with what's going on in his father's house as he sees.
Breaks out the whip. He breaks out the whip.
Well, there's time for love everyone Jesus, and there's time for kick ass and take names Jesus, and this is the time to kick a lot of people out of the university.
And speaking of whips and universities and physics, our specialization, Eric, string theory, as a whip, as a cat of nine tails, what is it doing to contribute to this problem, or maybe ameliorate it?
Oh boy, I mean, this is the thing, right? At some level, I don't think any string theorist, no matter the most ethically badly behaved string theorist, is not confused about whether 1 times 1 equals 2. And it is also the case that the thing about string theory that no other field does is it attempts to murder all of its rivals, not by success, not by proving things through experiment and prediction, but it has a particularly sublicidal attitude that I've never seen anywhere else in academics. It is the belief that no one else is doing anything, and if anyone else does something, then they're part of our team. That is the sin, which is in part leading to this becoming possible. The reason that this is possible, this podcast, is because at some level people can see, well, obviously the string theorists are lying. They're lying about their level of success. They're lying about their competition. They've been 40 years promising people things will be different 10 years from now. And people can tell that you're peeing on their leg and saying that it's raining. And their feeling is, if you're doing that behavior, maybe I can't trust you down to the number 0 or down to what it means to do a simple arithmetic operation.
And also looking at the confluence again of we're in an election year. We've got the same 2 candidates we had. We have, at various times, different mental pandemics, physical pandemics. Now we're seeing a mass sort of revelation and maybe even a mea culpa, a teshuva moment. How do you see what's happening with recent forced revelations? And by the way, for those that don't know, Eric was probably the first person I knew who was on this. We got to know each other very well at this time, 4 or 5 years ago. And this was almost immediate to you, immediately apparent to you, these charges of racism and so forth against those that spoke about COVID. Where are we at with COVID? Is it time for a reckoning? Can we say mea culpa? Can we let people off? Do there need to be orange jumpsuits? What do you think about that, Eric?
We need a deep and painful reconciliation over the lies around COVID. Period. The end.
How can you trust this same government that was responsible for many of the attempts to suppress, conceal, and call into question so-called conspiracy theorists, that they're now, kind of the blue ribbon panel that's responsible for this as well?
The first thing we have to do is we have to get the allied fields to stop using science's credit card for political expediency. That is, public health is not science. I'm going to repeat that. Public health is not science. When you have to communicate something like wash your hands or, wear a condom before sex, and, part of it has to do with we'll get celebrities to say things that rhyme. You're trying to spread information. You have hypotheses in public health that, like, people aren't very smart. They're not very capable of following long protocols. Things should be simple, to the point. So this created a disaster. We told people, only crazy people need masks. Don't be a worrywart. This is no worse than the flu. And then it was, no, it's the Black Plague. You must wear masks. And then it's, well,
you'll kill grandma.
Well, maybe you would kill.
Don't wear it.
Maybe you would kill grandma, but you know what? Maybe you're going to damage.
The next one you will.
Maybe you're going to damage kids by keeping them home, and maybe you're going to throw the world into a dangerous state by shutting down businesses. What we need to make sure that public health is on its own. You guys want to lie to the public? Fine, but I don't want to get all the credibility from the anomalous magnetic moment of the electron out to 10 decimal places of accuracy and throw it away on Anthony Fauci's changing position on masks. I also don't want, if our biowarfare program is housed inside of NIAID, remember that's the National Institute, and then we'll de-emphasize allergies, and let's highlight an infectious disease. We signed and ratified these conventions, the Bioweapons Convention, the Geneva Convention, that gave us rules and restrictions about what we could do with offensive biological weaponry. And my concern is that we rolled this stuff into the NIH. We have no idea what the EcoHealth Alliance is. I'm reasonably sure it's not the charity that it pretends itself to be. We have to get the national security complex into a more mature relationship with science. National security needs science, and science, quite honestly, has benefited from national security. But this relationship we're in now, where basically they lie about things and then scientists have to cover for it, or where we're using nature to make crazy statements about men and women, like, the journal Nature can't figure out what male and female is. This is not going to work. What we need is a painful come to Jesus moment where lots of people say we lied. And I don't know what's complicated about that. This is the time to restore credibility. And credibility begins with, we lied.
Transparency.
Sometimes for better reasons, like national security. We thought we were doing the right thing. Sometimes for worse reasons, because Pfizer has its tentacles wrapped around our news bureaus, whatever it is. But for God's sake, we're either going to go to the gym and get healthy or we're not.
And we look at the challenge that I see is that basically to take at face value anything an expert says and follow it blindly is incredibly perilous. And the people that believe that most of all are scientists. There's always a danger invoking Richard Feynman, right? He can say anything for any purpose at any time. But, his famous statement, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts, meaning you don't make progress if you assume there are authorities that can't be questioned. And while that's true, it's also a double-edged sword, because I don't think scientists themselves, by their nature, are anti-authoritarian. And I think that leads us to have some credibility that we earn in certain regimes that should be narrowly restricted to our domain expertise. When people ask me about global warming, I always say, I hope when you invite a climate scientist and you ask her about the effects of dark energy and the expansion of the universe, she says, ask a cosmologist. But typically, my colleagues don't have that restraint. I want to get your take on this, Eric. I claim controversially, and I get punished from this from our friend Sabina Hassenfelder, but I believe it's a moral failing of a scientist to not communicate in simple terms what we do. I think we exist at the pleasure of the public. They pay our salaries through taxes. I'm a professor at a public university, but every scientist is funded at some level, as a public servant at some level, public funding. What do you think the obligations of a card-carrying scientist, is? What are the obligations, rather? What should he or she do? I have a podcast. You have a podcast. You do outreach. We do talks all around the world. Is that enough? Should I be doing more? Should our colleagues be doing more? And is this going to lead to the ultimate eroding of confidence if we silo things away and say, you're not smart enough to understand it?
I mean, to be blunt, let's talk about how we got into the situation with the Terrance Howard podcast. Okay? We do a guided tour of science, and the guided tour is a huge danger to the public support of science. Let me explain. If you say, I went to France and I toured Versailles, I saw Versailles. Did you really see Versailles? Do you know how many rooms are in Versailles? Did you visit them all? What percentage of the grounds did you have access to? So my claim is that we're doing the same thing with science. And let me say how it relates to Terrance Howard's podcast. Terrance Howard went off the guided tour, and he found all sorts of rooms that experts know exist, but that the public is sort of misled into thinking aren't there. So I'll give you a very simple example. The periodic table. There is no the periodic table. And everybody who cares about periodic table stuff should know that there is no the periodic table. The physicist's favorite version of the periodic table is called I don't know whether it's Genet or Jeanette, because I've never heard it said even once in my presence, left step periodic table. But there are multiple periodic tables having to do with the complexity of electron orbitals. And when Terrance Howard tells you, I'm looking at the Walter Russell periodic table, and it's a
spiral.
Okay, well, you say spirals, right? But the issue is, let me tell you something else he's going to say. He's going to say, well, if there are vibrations in atoms, then there's also vibrations in music. And so everything that is an atomic vibration is also therefore a musical vibration. Milton Babbitt I think explored this at Princeton in the music department, and his student Stanley Jordan, who I met, he and I discussed that Stanley Jordan, who's a brilliant guitarist, was mining this for inspiration. What do the molecules sound like? So that's not crazy, right? So it's not fair.
Well,
Wait. It's not fair to say, okay, well, this guy is just like loop-de-doo because he knows about a spiral periodic table, or he's comparing the sound of a vibration to something in atomic physics. Furthermore,
but Eric, you would never say that Stradivarius played an incredible cesium note. I mean, it only goes one way. And you never have it go the other way from woo to non-woo. It's always from non-woo to woo. And they borrow
from woo to non-woo. When Kekule saw a snake eating its tail and decided that that was the inspiration for benzene, right? There are ways in which woo ends up as non-woo. So again, the thing is, you and I can also have a different perspective. You may say that there is no instance of woo becoming non-woo. I don't mind disagreeing, but I warn you, I know a lot of history. The thing that I'm going to say is that it pays not to brush off Terrance Howard's appearance with the back of our hands. And let me say where I was headed with this. The circle of fifths in music is not a circle. It's a spiral. And the reason for that is that you can't have both a perfect octave and a perfect Pythagorean fifth as part of an even-tempered scale. Number theoretically, it just can't work. And as a result, if you choose special numbers of notes, namely 12, 29, and 53, you can get a perfect octave and a nearly perfect third. Those special numbers cause that, nearly perfect fifth. Those special numbers have that property. Most people don't know that that's true. If they sit down at a piano, they see 12 notes on it. So what happens when Terrence, for example, figures out that lots of things are true that aren't well known? There is no the periodic table. There's a spiral one. There is no circle of fifths. There's a spiral one. And you can associate tones with vibrations and molecules with vibrations and frequencies. You take all of that and you push it together and you create this delicious amalgam where everything is connecting to everything. And this is part of the pleasures of the overly associative mind, is that it sees meaning in random numbers, random letters,
I think that's beautiful from an artistic perspective. I don't think Terrance is meaningful, trying to mislead or harm or sell some life extension or, penis extension supplements or something like that. What I do hear people like Tucker and people like Bart Sibrel, they do have agendas, Eric. And I don't think it's as innocent as the kind of mellifluous mind that you're pointing out, which I don't have a problem with what you said. I think it can be taken too far into the quantum healing of our friend Deepak Chopra. But at least in that frame, they're not eroding. You said once, people that claim they don't trust in experts, should never take a Southwest flight. Although, maybe experts will not also take Southwest flights on Boeing airplanes, but that's besides the point. At what point do you feel it's dangerous? Not the Terrance Howards, baby, although that is the title here, but the Tucker Carlsons and the Bart Sibrels that undermine the credibility in what should be our least polarizing institutions, NASA. This is not like the Wuhan Lab Eco Health Alliance. This is funding basic research into airline safety, space travel, telescopes. What do you say to people like that? I claim that is not so innocuous, and I think it's actually dangerous.
I think it's dangerous too, but I also, if we're going to be look, Brian, I think that you and I should both agree and disagree on this panel, and because we know how to do that as friends and colleagues, maybe the space benefits from that. But here goes nothing.
Yeah.
We went to the moon in peace, and we did it on top of an ICBM. The International Geophysical Year was 1957, and we all agreed that Antarctica was never to be militarized. I'm not positive exactly what our issues are between national security and national advantage and our concern for the human race and all knowledge. In other words, it's always been a difficult and fraught relationship figuring out why the taxpayers are funding something that has no national component to it at all. National security, national interest, and science have this really, it's like a great partnership that's incredibly fraught, like Lennon and McCartney, or
the two cultures,
or Gilbert and Sullivan, or Aerosmith's. You always get these writing teams where people make magic and drive each other absolutely crazy. And that's what I would say is the relationship between the federal government and the universities that do the science. So what I believe is partially what people are telling us is if you don't stop lying about national security, we don't trust you.
And putting gatekeepers again into the same people that will investigate what happened with COVID or, in a 9/11 commission. Where do you draw a line? I'm getting criticism for, this the debunking video that I made about Bart Sibrel on Joe Rogan's podcast because, it's claimed I'm making ad hominem attacks, and these people are really showing the truth. And I'm just a gatekeeper, Eric. I just defend big NASA and big cosmology. I wish, by the way, there was a NASA lobby. No, I'm just kidding. But the point is, it's almost like we don't have any comity, not comedy, but comity, that we cannot agree that we can differ, and I can present scientific facts. Lunar laser ranging measures the precision of the retroreflectors left by Neil Armstrong to 1 millimeter precision. That is done to measure the third order terms in the in the Einstein equations. For looking for departures from the inverse square law. These are not things that are controversial, like we're battling for Cold War supremacy. This is fundamental physics, and it's being doubted by people that have agendas, that have films and projects that they want to propose in books and want to get on big podcasts, like speaking to people like you and Joe Rogan and Lex and others. So what is to be done with people like that? Is it true that it is questionable because we question the COVID origins and we question, the 9/11, if it was inside job and so forth, that now everything is on the table to be questioned? And what point can we draw a line without being accused of being a gatekeeper?
I wonder if you're going to love or hate this answer, but here goes nothing. Okay. If you take Building 7's collapse, the instant I say Building 7, an enormous number of people get very either excited or disgusted. In other words, Building 7 was a thing that happened, but you'll notice that you're not allowed to have questions around Building 7. I think it's the only collapse of a building of that type ever recorded in human history. And if you find it interesting, there is something terribly wrong with you. So my point is not to make any new headway on Building 7. It's to say, whatever that thing is doesn't work anymore. In other words, if I can prove that this is the only building that's ever collapsed with a story like that, it is interesting in and of itself. And telling people nothing to see, move along is incredibly creepy. Assume that it collapsed exactly as the official report says. There's nothing weird or bizarre.
That's fine.
Well, but telling people that you are creepy for finding that weird or interesting is partially what's fueling the backlash.
Oh, that's not my point, Art. My point is that the Building 7 uniqueness, sui generis, is now causing people to doubt metallurgists.
No, and, I understand. But like what I'm trying to say is the Bureau of Labor Statistics is lying about the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, being in the cost of living framework, because that would require understanding the preferences of consumers. So if I want to question the CPI, which I do, because I have actually original work in exactly that area, the response is not a normal scientific response. And what you're trying to say is, look, people know interesting things about beryllium, and why is it that if I publish something about beryllium that has nothing to do with national security, that just has to do with, understanding how it behaves in the laboratory, that is under question? And what I'm trying to say to you, Brian, is we've got to realize that we branched off into expert witness culture. And in expert witness culture, you say, okay, who's hiring me and what do you want me to find? And when I get to understand what's a win for you? That culture causes everyone to think, maybe I can't trust anything about beryllium. Maybe I can't trust a study that tries to figure out how fast fingernails grow in different ethnic groups. Maybe the idea is if you can't tell what a male is from a female, maybe I should apply, and this is the key concept, the global universal discount of 95%. Now you start to understand what the problem is that a small amount of lying about national security or trying to get grants or pretending that you have no competitors and that your theory isn't failing in string theory, let's say, causes people to think, I don't trust your calculation of the anomalous magnetic moment of the electron to 11 decimal places. And you're thinking, well, wait a second, we're just lying about string theory. We're not lying about electrons. Well, there's no just lying about string theory. We're lying about string theory, and it's being applied as a global discount. What I would claim is that we need to come to Jesus moment where we need to say that more or less science is trustworthy, and we need to say that universities are trustworthy. And there's a small amount of social engineering you can do in order to serve your home countries. But my belief is that it will not support the level of activism that we're seeing. You should take my detractors and haters from within the PhD community and you should give them more money. And the reason that I say that is that a lot of what you see as hatred or negging or all of this stuff is people jockeying for a position where there's far too little security and people are incredibly accomplished and they are all fundamentally at death's door because everyone is sensitive. Can my provost now get rid of me? Can I have a DEI complaint against me? Am I going to lose my grants? And if you don't have people who can say F you to all of that stuff, you will not be able to trust your science, your medicine, your nutrition. And not paying your experts is basically a decision to commit suicide. If you don't pay your experts, your society is checking into a hospice. The idea that you cannot share the fruits of a capitalist society with people who cannot patent their ideas because they traffic in basic research. You've excluded them from the wealth generating portion of your country, and you've said, please serve the rest of us with truth, with new creative ideas, with new industries. And this is a recipe for disaster. And I'm sorry to say it, but you have to get people who say, subject everything to the market to recognize you have made it impossible to market to commercialize certain things like pure science. You need to pay these people at the level that they can take 3 children through school, they can buy a second home, and they can buy a luxury automobile or two, and they can have a retirement. And if you want to whine about that,
but don't we need to gatekeep there too? I mean,
and if you want to whine about that, please unfollow me, right? If we don't pay our experts and we don't make them secure, we are going to have what we have now. And I don't want to live in a society where I can't trust my experts.
When you have the same experts, though, that seemingly are willing to support mutually contradicting ideas, assertions that the average person with no academic credentials can see as lunacy, things like, no free will. And despite the fact that they admit they act as if they have free will. I mean, at what level do we take, say, people that study panpsychism or, Roswell, et cetera? Do we fund those? I mean, who gets the munificence of the taxpayer?
Did we fund John Archibald Wheeler to study UFOs and anti-gravity?
I am assuming that we did.
Did we fund Freeman Dyson? Did we fund Robert Oppenheimer? Did we create a cutout in Roger Babson and Agnew Bainson and fund the Institute for Physical Fields at North Carolina Chapel Hill, where Peter Higgs did the work on the Higgs boson? I mean, my claim is that I don't know what we funded and what we didn't. Did we inject people with plutonium, fellow citizens, against their will and without their knowledge? We did. I mean, in other words, we all talk about Tuskegee now. right? But what about the fact that we infected San Francisco from a ship with a bacteria to test how bacteria would behave in a city? I think what I'm trying to say, Brian, is the first move is ours as scientists, which we have to say we are way too poor. We are much more trained than we pretend when we say, aw shucks. We are much more willing to allow our colleagues to lie, to pursue grants. We say that everything's going great when it isn't. Nobody has an idea that when we're caught lying, we are assumed to be lying about everything. And I think that what we need to do is we need to say, look, you're not paying us enough. You're not funding the experiments. You're putting us in a terrible situation. And if you want to whine about taxpayer dollars, you can kiss your prosperous society goodbye, because this work needs to be done and the market can't do it. And if you want to have an adult conversation, we're here for it. But we need to be unapologetically elitist, Brian. And I think people are very uncomfortable. They believe in elite surgeons for their children when they're under the knife. They believe they want to be defended by elite commandos in Delta Force. And what I'm trying to say is, you also want elite scientists, and let's not beat around the bush. There's a big difference. Even I, who's one of the biggest critics of Ed Witten or Leonard Susskind or any of these people at the top of the string theory pile, we all know that zero exists and 1 times 1 equals 1.
And yet people will say the data belongs to us. I've heard that more times than I can really contemplate. And, for me, the question, first of all, has to be answered: what is the data? What are the data, if you want to be pedantic? Is it the Hubble Deep Field? Is that the data, or the Webb telescope data? Is it the, the findings of your friend David Grush? Does that belong to the public? And where do we draw the line? Where is it okay for the taxpayers to demand access, accountability, transparency?
Well, okay.
Or is it not?
Let's look at this. If I were to say, hey, do you believe that you want all data made available to everyone, even if it results in homemade nuclear weapons, weaponized anthrax? Everybody who wants all data made available to everyone, please put a thumbs up. I'm not seeing that many thumbs up. If you believe that,
Well, give it a second. Professors only wait 6 seconds before they answer the question. So put a thumbs up if you want access to,
if you want
anthrax data, COVID, EcoHealth.
Everyone to have all data, including weaponized anthrax, including homemade nuclear weapons. Okay. Now, if instead you want most data to be made available to the public that the public pays for, with some sanity provisions, then put a thumb up now. So my claim is, in general, people are asking for all data because they don't trust what's going on. And I understand this completely. When you've lost trust to this level, I want all data on EcoHealth Alliance. That could be incredibly damaging to U.S.-China relations. It could be very bad for our position with respect to Russian bioweapons or the Iranians. Right now, I don't care. I'm so tired of Peter Daszak. I'm so tired of Francis Collins, and I'm so tired of Anthony Fauci that I just don't trust them at all, as far as they can throw them. And sight unseen, I want to know what the hell happened to my lungs, to my children, to my body, to my country, to the economy. I just have no concept of what happened. That is a very bad position to be in. If you imagine that I had given some kind of an explanation, I would not be here. I would say, we have to be careful. We have to be cautious. Of course, we can't know everything about what's going on. We have to realize that there are longstanding programs. Some of them are quiet, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that the loss of confidence is so profound at this point that many of us just want to cut the Gordian knot. And what I would say is, if the intelligence community doesn't want that, if the higher ups in science don't want that, if the elite institutions don't want that, then come across with the goods now, or else prepare to face the mobs at the Bastille. These kids on these college campuses are going to get older. They're not going to necessarily grow out of all of this stuff. And you're not going to want to live in the society where things are so relative that we're questioning basic arithmetic.
And how are we going to confront this in an open society, to use our, George Soros' favorite term, when we have unfettered, unlimited, open access LLMs, and do you think that there's some hope, or does that bring any optimism to you that not only will, if the data were made public, that actually something could be done with it? There's nothing worse than getting, petabytes of data. It's if you want to curse somebody, just bless them with a petabyte of data, right? So let's say this comes through. Are there tools that we're not looking at, or what would you do if you were now, sitting at Fauci's desk or Collins's desk? What would you do maybe in that realm, and maybe in the realm of, UAP phenomena? What would you open source, and what do you expect could be made from, say, open source LLMs and
Marcia McNutt, if she is still head of the National Academy of Sciences, should give a speech. The speech should say, there is now a crisis in scientific confidence, and we are going to reestablish ground truth. We are going to have a concept of national security and national security privilege, and we are going to try to let you know to the extent possible when we cannot answer a question for reasons of national security. We expect you to trust us. And in exchange, what we are going to provide is the fact that we have lied to you and we've broken confidence and trust. And in so doing, we are going to say why and how we have broken confidence and trust. In what cases are we too close to industry? In what cases have we underfunded people who needed higher levels of funding and effectively asked them either to lie or to put themselves in terrible situations? We are going to be honest with you about our needs and our expectations and the difficult nature of the relationship between government and science and universities. And quite honestly, we are going to be unabashedly elitist. We are not going to do this democratization of ability. Everybody deserves a fair shake to try to play this game, but people have vastly different abilities, and we are not going to slow everybody down so that the weakest among us can catch up. This is a high performance activity. Almost nobody belongs in research, and we're going after the cream of the crop. We're going to be more honest about the way in which science is international and knows no boundaries, and the way in which science is highly national. And it is very important that different countries do science in different ways. There are different national cultures, and there is certainly national advantage and national interest. In particular, our new relationship is going to talk to you about the last 50 years of deception. We have deceived people. We deceived the world when we were building the atomic bomb by pretending that we did not have a new city in New Mexico called Los Alamos. Harold Urey published false information in order to get our enemies off of the scent. We have used small amounts of deception. We have done things that are unethical, like the Tuskegee experiment, like the plutonium injections. I think it was Operation Sea Spray in San Francisco. We need to be able to test things, to do certain things quietly. We need data that we can hold back. And we also have to realize that we have relied on that as an explanation when it was not a fair explanation. And the American people and the world deserve better. Many people may be dead by something that went wrong in a lab accident in Wuhan, China. And whatever the cost to our relationship with the Chinese, we need to get to the bottom of it. We may need to revisit the bioweapons convention from the 1970s because maybe we signed a bad deal. But fundamentally, we need to renew the Vannevar Bush Endless Frontier Compact between university science and the federal government for a modern age in which we can rely on a deep partnership where you are represented by experts who are not hostile to your interests, who are well paid, and who are not seeking infinite fortune, because what they have is they have societal respect and the ability to work on the most interesting problems in the world. And we're not going to make these people poor, and we are not going to tell them that they are somehow welfare queens and white lab quotes, to use the old expression, for expecting money, because what we've done is we've taken them out as a priestly class from the world of intellectual property. And in so doing, we are reestablishing the relationship that everyone wants, where the adjudication of ground truth will be done by scientists. We're going to stop lying to you about gender. We're going to stop lying to you about COVID origins, and we're going to stop lying about vaccine safety. We're going to trust you with more information, And if you can't handle that, then this will go horribly south and we'll all suffer. But the right thing to do is to trust the people who we are ultimately trying to serve and who fund the projects.
Will there be irreparable damage because of people with enormous megaphones like Tucker and Terrence? Will it possibly be past the tipping point that we cannot recover credibility with a public that's used to treating, the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist or somebody like that on an equal par
but
with?
you're doing you're saying conspiracy theorists. My question.
I'm talking about Bart Sibrel in this case.
But
Yeah.
Brian,
It's a conspiracy. I mean, his Wikipedia page says conspiracy theorist. That's his
okay. If I look at Google Ngrams, conspiracy theorist appears to start in 1962, 63, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I know why.
Yeah. Well, my claim is, if you use the word conspiracy theorist so much as once to throw shade, to disparage and discredit somebody who was actually correct about something, you lose that as a weapon. We've lost that as a term. We called people conspiracy theorists who were right. What I'm trying to say is, if there's going to be a new compact, we are not going to go around saying these people are conspiracy theorists. We're going to be going around saying Tucker Carlson does not know partial differential equations. He just doesn't, right? It is the case that when you give everybody a virus in their lungs, suddenly everybody knows what messenger RNA is. mRNA, we've heard of now, but do we know about transfer RNA and the adapter hypothesis? In general, what the public is being forced to do is to learn science piecemeal. And the problem with Terrance Howard or Tucker Carlson or any of these people, including us, is that we're not coming at it with the right concepts. Conspiracy theorist is the wrong concept. I claim there's some conspiracy around the EcoHealth Alliance. Am I a conspiracy theorist? Okay.
Sure. And someone could be a scientist, call themselves a scientist, and they may or may not be an actual scientist, a cognitive scientist,
But Brian,
medical scientist.
Conspiracy theorist is an epithet. It is also a description of somebody who has, if you're going to try to catch a conspirator, everybody who prosecutes RICO against organized crime is a conspiracy theorist. But you never.
Sure. So that's why I don't agree that it's an
call
epithet.
them that, do you? You don't say. Do you believe in the five crime families of New York? Do you believe in the Gambinos? Is everyone who believes that the Gambino crime family exists a conspiracy theorist? We never use the term for that.
Okay. Wow. I mean, I think that's sort of undermining the original point.
I don't think so.
The erosion.
You and I are.
I mean, forget it. I'm not calling Terrance Howard a conspiracy theorist. I'm calling him a manipulator, maybe an actor, maybe a sensationalist. I don't know why. Of course, he's definitely a curious person. But I'm asking you, he's undoubtedly smart. He's at the upper, 0.01% of people in his profession. It doesn't come by accident. But my question is, does that do damage? If I tried to act as Terrance Howard, I would utterly fail miserably and no one would take me seriously. But if I start to opine about his acting chops, then no one should listen to me. It shouldn't be a halo effect because the man was nominated for an Oscar in 2000.
No. But
what is the downstream? Hold on. What is the downstream effect of having such people platformed on? And I'm not for suppressing him. I'm just saying, what is the downstream effect? And is there a negative contributor to that? I mean, we have a responsibility to the public as well as, to curious minds. It's not like you're just talking to Joe over a beer.
So the thing that I think where I am is, do you realize what we do? We say everyone can be a scientist. Here's literally how we talk to grade school children. Everyone can be a scientist. All you need to do is to take an interest in something, form a hypothesis, take some data, try to revise your hypothesis. It's fun. It's not something for other people. Science is for you. Okay? Now, what I think happened is Terrance Howard heard that his whole life, took it seriously, found out a ton of interesting stuff, made all sorts of connections. And there's some way in which we are going to blame Terrance Howard for following exactly the instructions we give, which is everyone can be a scientist.
I'm not blaming him. I'm blaming the people that are relying on him for scientific knowledge and for facts, not for wisdom, not for curiosity or inspiration, for relying on Terrance Howard for science. And believe me, if you don't think that there's, 3/4 of the audience or that's listening right now that could be positively predisposed to it, I think that's not being accurate. There's a tremendous number of people that I've received comments from in all day. Uh, you know, here's Tesla said the same thing about frequency, energy, vibration. Here's a quote from, Epictetus, whatever. And at what level does that undermine maybe his noble intentions to excite people? I mean, what if you found out that the universe is 13.8 billion years, but that actually fits into a 7-day biblical narrative of Genesis quite accurately? In fact, is that dangerous? I mean, if that is, how would you relate to that? Or that it's actually a 5,700-year-old universe? At what level do we stake curiosity and say that these are non-overlapping magisteria or, whatnot, and they're harmless? And what point do they become harmful? I wanted to restrict it to him and perhaps Tucker and Bart Sibrel for their, different classes, but I think this is quite curious. And if the 1 × 1 = 2, do you want that person to be, filling out your bill at the restaurant or, charting your course on your airplane?
I hesitate to say it, but I will say the following. There is a technical way in which 1 × 1 = 2.
Oh, no, we're not doing this.
Wait 1 second.
I'm going to have to shut down.
No, you don't. You don't.
Get into rings and
No, it's a group.
But that's not the way he was.
No,
reading
of
it.
course.
Oh, go ahead.
I know very well. He's wrong.
Okay.
Can we agree that he's wrong so that we don't get it?
We can agree. I want everyone listening.
Yeah, the dangerous thing is that we call the real numbers under addition a group, and the law inside a group is called group multiplication, and the group multiplication of the real numbers under addition is the group multiplication law is addition. Now, I fear what happens when people, a little knowledge being a dangerous thing, if people get confused by the fact that we use the word multiplication to mean addition in that situation, then you can say, oh, no, he's actually right. She isn't. You can take any one of these things and push it. What I'm trying to say is I would really like us to completely overhaul the relationship between science, the elite, speculation, research. I would like us to acknowledge all the times that an amateur beat the experts, and that, Green's function, for example, would be a good example of this in the past. It's rare, but it happens. The problem that we have is that we would basically like to say too many things. We'd like to say, we want all of you to think of yourself as scientists. We'd like everyone to not fear research and try to do their own research. No, wait a minute. We don't mean do your own research if it contradicts the public health narrative. Is public health science? Yes, it is on Tuesdays. No, it isn't otherwise. We've gotten ourselves into such a web of contradictions that we are going to have to extricate ourselves. And the first thing that I'd like us to do is to take all of the terms, crackpot, lunatic, et cetera, and think very, very carefully about how we dole them out. And then I'd like to say, why are we inviting everyone into science? Do we want them to do their own research, or do we not want them to do their own research? And if we don't want them, can we explain to them why we don't want them to do their own research? What I'm thinking, Brian, is that the current relationship is unsalvageable. Now, what you and I believe is that science as a method of thinking, of a way of approaching the world, is second to none. And what we're in danger of doing is losing its preeminence in the mind of the public, which is now so turned around by the abuse of science and its use as a political tool that we cannot count on people saying, wait a minute, can we get an expert opinion? Does this claim about the square root of 2? I mean, I'm just going to say it very clearly. To claim that the square root of 2 is somehow distinguished because its cube is equal to 2 times the square root of 2 is simply to say that the square root of 2 is one of 3 roots of a cubic polynomial that factors as y minus the square root of 2 times y minus 0 times y plus the square root of 2. We have a failure to teach high school algebra if this has gotten to this level and everyone thinks, oh, we need a podcast of all of you together to sort this out. No, we do not.
I guess the fundamental question, again, I divide different categories for these people, that we listed in the top of the space. But ultimately, before I turn to the final questions about academia that I have for you, just as on a personal level, as a fellow podcaster, when I'm talking with people and I know that they have an agenda, it's often difficult for me to maintain, the kind of comity of spirit and talking. I'm thinking about, I had a podcast with Eric Topol, 2 years ago, and simultaneously while I'm hosting him, I'm thinking about all the downstream effects of his political, scientific, he's a physician, but he's what I call a political scientist, because he was using the credibility from the scientific discoveries that he made and spending it in the political arena. I find that very dangerous and even ultimately undermining his own point. But the point I'm asking you about is, when talking to such people, what responsibility does and I'm absolutely putting myself I want this clear and recorded. I am comparing myself to Joe Rogan and Lex Fried. No, I'm just kidding. And Eric. But when I'm talking to such people, what can I do to express with respect, push back, call them out? You don't want to be, kind of tainted with a negative, light. I'm already accused of being a gatekeeper enough as it is. What do I do? I'm sitting down to talk to a Nobel Prize winning scientist who made great contributions to the COVID vaccine, messenger RNA vaccine, upcoming. Do I talk about the unabashed, side effects and sort of speak freely about that, even though it may alienate him and ruin? I shouldn't have said him. It could be her. But yeah, should I? How do you recommend, as a mentor in this space to me, that I behave when I confront such people in order not to, to develop a brand, but also to push back and ask the questions that my audience wants me to ask?
The short answer is I don't really know. None of us know. We're all making it up. I'm in a parking lot outside of CVS having this conversation in front of, over 2,000 people. I'm sure it's going to be recorded. I'm reading some of the reactions. I found Christoph Woff, I don't have my reading glasses on. 1 second. And he says, Eric's attitude is so condescending, it hurts.
It's okay, Christoph.
What am I doing? This is one of it's a motif, right? The idea being, right now, I'm standing up for a lot of people who are voiceless. And I'm also standing up for a system that's under attack. So I'm viewing myself, by the way, Christoph, just because I enjoy actually responding to these things. Right now, my world is under attack. All of the people who listened to this thing and said, this is inspiring. Somebody's connecting all sorts of stuff. I've never heard this stuff before. Now they're going to be yelled at by scientists. Oh, we have PhDs, listen to us. That's exactly what I don't want to do. I want to yell at my colleagues and say, do you realize we're losing everybody and these people are going to vote on the NIH and the NSF and the DOE budgets? I'm trying, Christoph, to figure out how to reestablish a world of sanity, how not to give up preeminence in a dangerous world, to actually take on the fact that people don't know whether they made a mistake injecting their family with a vaccine. They don't know where this thing came from. They feel powerless. They don't know what's true and what isn't. Is the economy, is the inflation rate that's published, does it have anything to do with reality? I'm angry, and I'm trying to basically stick up for everything that I care about. And I don't know how to do it without becoming this incredibly forceful voice. All right. So, Brian, should you become a forceful voice? I don't know. Maybe the idea is that you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Maybe, on the other hand, you need to just clear your throat and say what's true. I think that what all of us are experiencing is we don't know, because we're in a new world. These devices that we hold in our pockets are changing everything. And there's something wrong, deeply wrong, with a world that has a three-way race between RFK Jr., Donald Trump, and Joe Biden with Kamala Harris as vice president of the United States. We are not treating this as a thermonuclear planet. We're not treating this as the dangerous place that it is. We're not treating it as a place with a future. What I would say is we've got to start having deeper, more meaningful conversations where people can see the difference. And if you ask me, the reason that people are gravitating to this, it's because they see somebody who's curious, interesting, has lots of knowledge that they don't have, which is one of the things I use Joe Rogan for. I try to talk about things like the Hopf vibration or Clifford algebras. Why is it that we hear over and over about the multiverse, over and over about entanglement, and we never hear about Clifford algebras? We are doing a bad job. And right now, the key thing that we can do as scientists is look at ourselves and say, we're not doing the right job interacting with the public. We're not doing the right job when the public follows the directive that we gave them to enter the scientific framework. And we are also absolutely not doing a good job telling the public we need vastly more job security and money in order to get people to be truthful, because the pressures you're putting people under are going to crack almost everyone.
And then before I release you to get your fourth COVID jab in CVS, I wanted to ask you about, I'm joking, the, the future of academia. I've been disillusioned. We talked over dinner and fine kosher wine recently about the situation that I faced on campus, and my many colleagues have as well. I'm curious if you were talking to a bright young undergraduate, about to, have all the options in the world, go to graduate school, go, work for Google Gemini to make their models more culturally sensitive, go work for a hedge fund. What do you say to him or her at that first critical junction of graduate school as someone who is, let's face it, abused as a graduate student? To me, who had a phenomenal experience, and I'm thriving in academia and never been happier scientifically and never been more miserable to be faced with the awful situation that I have been on campus since October 7th. What do you advise to these, three different groups, graduate student and undergraduate faculty?
Well, first of all, I would say that this situation with Terrance Howard is wonderfully clarifying. Terrance Howard, I don't know anything about him as a human being. I know nothing about his pluses and minuses as a soul. He looked like an interested person who had lots of ideas, and he shared them. And I can guarantee you that in a world in which people are willing to throw away the idea that zero exists or that they don't know what multiplication is, it makes a lot of sense that right now there's a genocide going on in the Middle East. If you believe one thing, you can easily believe a second. There is no knowledge about what anything means at the moment. It's sort of like make up stuff. If you're in a story, that's what's going on at some level. It's also the case that nothing feels like it actually matters. You can yell at people, you can take over buildings. There are no consequences. Right now, what we're seeing is a cognitive implosion. Instead of actually caring about the Middle East and trying to figure out what to do that would stop deaths, we're actually protesting for things that would increase the number of deaths. We are actually, in a weird way, seeing pro-genocidal, anti-genocidal protesters. Every up is down, left is right. Dogs and birds and bees and cats are having group sex. It's enough. Whatever this thing is, we can't constantly pretend that everybody has an idea, everybody has a worthwhile point of view. We need discipline. And what I would say is go back to things that were true in 1970. Try to find institutions that went through 2 world wars and survived to the other side. Make sure that to borrow from Bob Dylan, strap yourself to a tree with roots. Right now, the winds are blowing heavy and fast. Lash yourself to something that feels permanent and prepare for abuse. You asked me about graduate school. Yeah, I had a terrible, terrible, terrible experience in graduate school. But you know what? I survived. I did some great work. I met fantastic people. And you're not meant to get through life without any abuse. Just try to make sure that you don't overdo it in one period of your life. You're strong. You can weather some trauma. Quite honestly, we need people to go into science who have incredible huevos, that the equal opportunity term for both men and women. What we need is more people of courage. It's nice if you get a perfect ACT or SAT score going into college and you get straight A's, but it's much more important that when they come with the loyalty oath to ask you to pledge to diversity, equity, inclusion, or say wrong things about science, or you won't get a grant, to say, up yours with a red hot poker, I'm going to go find some rich person to fund my science. I'm not going to stand for this. And if you want to try to fire me, best of luck.
Last question. Channel your inner Steven Pinker, but what are you optimistic about, Eric? What things on the horizon?
Interstellar travel, Brian.
And what would be the mechanism by which that would occur? Or should that be another podcast?
Geometric unity more serious. Thank you for asking. Great space. Really enjoyed it. And Brian, thank you for taking up this obviously fraught topic at a moment where it's very much on people's minds. I hope that the fact that you and I have it perfectly agreed is helpful to people. And I hope that for those of you who find the voices overbearing, elitist, et cetera, just give some thought to what's being defended. We've got thousands of years of people trying to figure out what Western civilization should be. After the barbarity that was in Europe within living memory that's finally fading, it would be a terrible thing to give up on everything that has been achieved at great cost just because we want to entertain ourselves a little bit more and we feel bored.
Sounds great. Eric, I will see you next week at an undisclosed location. We'll do many things over delicious drinks and libations galore. And
I'm looking forward to drinking way too much with you, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, Brian, for hosting the space.
And you're welcome, Eric. Thanks a lot. Everybody else, I will rip this to YouTube on Dr. Brian Keating is where you can find it, and also to my audio podcast, Into the Impossible. Eric's been an 11-time guest, and hopefully it'll be 12th time coming up very, very soon. And very much appreciate everybody attending this space and plan to do many more. So again, thank you all for attending. Give me some feedback, what you thought of it and what you think about some of the stuff that Eric and I talked about. Terrence, Tucker, Bart Sibrel, conspiracy theorists. He didn't like that, as you heard. I still think it can be used without being an epithet. And otherwise, I'll see you all next time, Twitter Spaces or on YouTube. Thanks very much. Bye.